Zoom technical questions, contact planning staff to use the chat. Let's begin by taking a roll of DRB members in attendance this evening. Nate Andrews. Here. Ryan Curtis. Here. Matt Frazier. Here. Scott Riley. And the chair is present. That's David Turner officially resigned. Okay. That's what I thought. We have 5, we do have a quorum. Okay, the Development Review Board, DRB, follows rules of procedure and conducts quasi-judicial proceedings, aka public hearings like court. Pursuant to Williston Unified Development Bylaw, WDB, Chapter 6, and Appendix A. You're on. Thank you. Am I on now? Okay. Sorry about that. The powers of the DRB are established in and limited by this bylaw, as well as state statute, and expounded upon in the staff reports for each public hearing application. As volunteer public officials, we are held to the standards of the Williston Volunteer Policy and the Williston Conflict of Interest Ordinance. For any public hearing tonight, first question, does any member wish to be excused on account of conflict of interest? No. Hearing none. Second question, does any member wish to report any ex parte contact? No. That's a no. Okay. First order of business is the public forum. This is an opportunity for members here in person or participating by Zoom. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
There is one attendee.
One attendee. Okay, so this is an opportunity for the attendee participating by Zoom to address the DRB on matters not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody that would like to address the DRB? Hearing none. Agenda item number 2, Certificate of Appropriateness. This is HP 26-01. Paul and Susie Dickin request a Certificate of Appropriateness to change the roof material from metal to architectural asphalt shingles and a modification to the garage at 8101 Williston Road. Are Paul or Susie present?
They are not present in person or online. However, the DRB can review this application because it's not a public hearing. You can go through the review without them.
Okay, great. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn it over to staff.
Thanks, Pete. This is a request for a certificate of appropriateness at 8101 Williston Road. This property is located in the Village Zoning District and National Register area. A determination of contributing structure status letter was issued on August 5th, and the recommendation that their proposed work complies as proposed with the standards of the bylaw. They are not changing the primary dwelling at 8099 Williston Road. The proposed door is a wood composite material and has a traditional rail and panel pattern. And the proposed window is double hung with 6/6 muntins. During the Historic and Design Advisory Committee review, some additional information was provided. And they did provide a photo of an existing door on the back addition of the main home. So the door is a likeness to this one, probably will be white to match the existing white barn, although we do not regulate color. So the barn did have a different, more modern contemporary garage door in the 70s, as shown in this photo. Today, the barn doors look more historic, and they are proposing to keep the set of double doors on the left side of the photo. On the right side, it will be replaced with the matching siding and a singular door. So the elevation view shows the before up top and the proposed change on the bottom with a regular man door and a 6/6 double hung window. So the recommendation is their application complies as proposed.
Great. Thank you, Emily. DRB members, any questions for staff?
You had noted that you wanted more details on the window and door, but it sounds like you got them, right?
Yes.
So we're good, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions from the audience or the individual participating by Zoom?
If you're on Zoom, you can comment in the chat or press the raise hand button. No chats and no raised hands.
Okay. Given the simplicity of this certificate of appropriateness, I'm going to call for votes now. Yay or nay to approve? Nate?
Yay.
Brian?
Yay.
Matt?
Yay.
Scott?
Yay.
The chair is a yay, 5 in favor, none opposed. Certificate of appropriateness is approved. Okay. Next up is a public hearing at DP 25-10, Chittenden Solid Waste District, for the proposed materials recycling facility, 68,750 square feet. Welcome. If you would please state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Greg Nixon from Redmond Rd Consulting Engineers. I'm a civil engineer on the project.
And I'm Josh Esty, Director of Operations for CSWD, 19 Gregory Drive in South Burlington.
Great. Welcome to you both. So I'm going to recommend that the hearing be continued to allow time for you to develop an updated plan. In the event of continuance, the major staff report items that must be addressed with sufficient quantifiable detail include the following. Number 1, a revised site layout that meets the recommendations of WCC and HDA for a wildlife corridor. Number 2, stormwater alternatives to clearly demonstrate with evidence the site conditions, infiltration test results, and analysis that led to the rejection of all other stormwater alternatives on site, such that the Conservation Commission recommendations from the HDA could not be met. 3, outdoor lighting to minimize habitat disturbance. 4, vehicle operations and queuing impacts on Redmond Road. 5, hazardous material management plan per WDB 18. 6, mechanical equipment and installation types and purposes. And finally, number 7, glass aggregate area, define the noise, dust, odor, and operations processing steps. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of all outstanding items in the staff report. You have the option of requesting that we proceed with the hearing as warned and proceed with testimony, and we, the DRB, will render a decision tonight. It's your call, so you've got 2 choices. You can agree with a continuance, and we'll work through the dates and the timing that you would need to develop a new plan and answer these questions. Or you can elect for us to proceed with testimony tonight, and the DRB will render a decision. And if you need to take pause and huddle and come back in a minute, that's fine.
Could we address some of these with the DRB and still continue if we feel like we didn't answer some of your questions? Because I feel like some of these items we did discuss a a lot of them were in the plan set, as well as some of the memos that I sent to the DRB. So I'm just wondering if those responses are just on the DRB doesn't agree with them, or where we stand on some of these things.
Can I answer something, one of those?
Yeah.
I'm a hard no on this. So you can address it all you want. I'm 1 out of 5. So you can lose another one and if, you know, and you don't have a quorum. It doesn't pass. So from my perspective, it's your choice, but you're on the risk of it being voted down unless you go back and redesign it.
So I mean, it would definitely be helpful for the project to hear what the hard no's are about.
It is not helpful. It's sitting right here.
And so I think the one thing that we discussed with both the Conservation Commission and staff was trying to gauge where the project is at, as well as sort of other aspects of that habitat assessment. There are 2 avenues for habitat around this project, and we were just trying to minimize both. And
I don't agree with you at all. We discussed this in the first hearing where you know, I know I brought up the discussion about you shifting it, I forget which way, but you shifting it, you know, the project, and your response was, no, it's in the best place that it can be. I disagree with that, and the person who put together the habitat disturbance agreement clearly disagreed with that. So there's not a lot up for discussions.
did you guys have a chance to read about why?
Yes,
it's positioned that
we
way,
did.
and
That's right.
the soils that we discovered? All that information about the infiltration testing and testing is in the plans. So all that is there.
That's correct. It is all there.
So
That doesn't mitigate this.
So how would you like to proceed?
I think we'll need just a minute to discuss.
You're entitled to that.
Okay.
Okay. You guys can just head outside, and so you don't have to get on your knees and stuff. We'll take whatever time you need.
Okay.
there anything else we could be talking about?
The town plan is adopted.
Congratulations.
You're invited to the social next week on Tuesday, the 2nd. With the resignation of David Turner, there's 2 vacancies for regular seats and a 3rd vacancy for the alternate seat on this board.
Any applicants?
Not that I'm aware of. I think summer has been a particularly tough time of year to recruit people. People, ask questions and are interested, but then don't seem to submit the applications to the select board.
Well, that all ends next week, so maybe people will perk up and start feeling, that it's their civic duty to do something.
Yes. The planning commission's gonna be, turning their work plan to new town plan items, which could result in some upcoming bylaw amendments. Later in the evening, I have board training, which is a little bit drier, but we could also discuss ways in which the DRB might want to engage with the town plan and might want to provide feedback to, both staff and the planning commission about what works well and what doesn't work well in the review process to inform future bylaw amendments. Yeah.
Was the process of getting the town plan adopted unanimous?
Yes, it was a unanimous select board vote. Mhm. I don't think everybody loves the town plan, on planning commission and select board, but there's no document that everybody 100% agrees on. But I think, the core principles of the document, everybody's pretty pleased with.
Good.
Okay, so I'll restate the question. Are we going to talk about continuance dates and revising the plan, or are we going to proceed with the submission that has been presented for this meeting?
I think based on the conversation we've had, we'd like to do the continuance.
Okay. So Emily, let's maybe you could display something on the screen in terms of steps, and we can start socializing some dates. And
Before we do that,
it's gonna be a step that's in there.
how much time do they need is the first thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I know, but I just agreed. But I was just giving Emily a chance to display something on the screen, and we'll do it where we can all look at it.
Yeah,
And that's the first question is, how much time do you need? And we need to consider that a reassessment of the revised plan needs to be factored in as well.
So I was gonna ask that, do we feel that's a necessary step if we meet the 300 feet that they have suggested?
It may be a truncated review, but we're gonna want the consultant to look at it again.
Yeah, I would probably defer to Dave on, as conservation planner, what timeline he thinks would be adequate. I mean, we'd have to touch base with our consultant, but it would likely be a truncated review.
Yeah, I would imagine that another site visit is not necessary, but I can speak with the consultant ASAP to determine what the timeline would be. I would imagine that it would be considerably faster than the first time round. There isn't any kind of baseline data. I don't think that would need to be retaken, but I can't speak for the consultant.
So what we can do, and what I would like to do,
Could you give us an idea if that also means we have to sit again with the Conservation Commission? I mean, we're basically, you're forcing our hand to do exactly what they said, so we're doing exactly what they said. So I don't know if there's a reason or a purpose to sit with them again. Is all we're saying.
we're going to follow all the same steps. And we'll be mindful of the fact that this is a delay, but we're going to follow all the same steps. We're not going to skip any. And what we can do tonight is we can rough out a plan and make it contingent upon the consultant agreeing to the timetable that we have allocated for him to do the work.
If we pick a date, it can always be continued past that, so.
But I'd like to have something notional that we come up with tonight.
Yeah. So I don't have anything good to screen share that shows like both the DRB schedule and the conservation schedule. If, for example, it were continued to, and this is a long timeline, but October 28th, the Conservation Commission meets on October 1st and 15th, which means that staff report would have to go out on October 9th. So maybe September 22nd or 29th to have a revised plan submitted to us, and that would give us 2 to 3 weeks to update our staff reviews, touch base with other departments, and get a staff report for the Conservation Commission. And that would give you guys a little over 3 weeks to work on your concept, or your civil plan.
Is that the quickest timeline, or is there a quicker timeline?
It could be a quicker timeline, like if we were to do October 14th, that would be conservation on the 1st, which would probably mean plans submitted September 15th, and that would give a week and a half for the consultant to update their review. If it could be before that, that would be better. And that would give you guys, about 2.5 weeks to rework things.
I think we should try for as quickly as possible, if the board and staff are available.
I think you're the,
I can work with you.
you have the biggest task here. So, okay. If you think you can meet that accelerated schedule, the DRB has no trouble with that. I don't think staff does. It's, okay. Okay, so summarize that again, please, for me.
Yes, so that would be DRB hearing continued to October 14th, conservation review on October 1st, application submittal either the 15th or the 22nd, and only the hearing date for the DRB needs to be publicly warned tonight. We can probably touch base this week with our HDA consultant and see, what window they would be working in September. So maybe like the 15th or 22nd pencil for an application submittal.
Okay. You're comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a question for the DRB with a revised habitat disturbance assessment based on the new plan, would you be hoping to see, would be effectively a letter from the consultant outlining their opinion on how the revised plan reflects the data they've collected and their understanding of the site?
And they don't need to re-summarize the entire
Yeah.
report, right? So that the data doesn't change if this is the same parcel.
Yes.
So some form of summary, but taking
Yeah.
into account the revision.
Yeah,
With
okay,
all of the same applications
understood,
should be provided.
understood.
I agree with that. But that's the town's subject matter expert, so we need them to weigh in on it. But it doesn't sound like that's gonna hold anything up, so. At least based on what we believe the turnaround will be. And.
Yeah, I'll find out
But you'll confirm
ASAP,
that
yeah.
tomorrow, yeah.
Would you be willing to share those items again with me?
Yeah, you can get those, you'll be able to get those from staff tomorrow. I have the list. I only have one copy. Well, you can take a picture of this with your,
We want.
Yeah, we can
wanna add that one.
send that list over to you for the sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's let staff give it to them, because I want one thing added to it.
okay, okay. The only thing that's being added is just clarity that, that the assessment, habitat assessment is refreshed. That's the only thing being added. Okay, anything else before I officially continue it? Okay. So DP 25-10 will be continued until October 14th.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. All right, so we do have some public attendees on Zoom. I am seeing our earlier applicant, Paul. That application for your barn was approved, so I'll be touching base with you, and you're welcome to jump off the public hearing.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is item number 3. It's titled Communication, Final Plans, and Other Business. FY 2026 organizational meeting. This is where we elect the chair and the vice chair. So I would like to nominate Nate Andrews as the next DRB chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second it. Any discussion?
Does he want? You sure?
Nate?
I'm up for it.
Yeah.
If everyone's good with it, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, I'd like to.
Great. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations.
Thanks, Pete.
Vice Chair, I would like to nominate Scott Riley to be Vice Chair. Scott, would you accept that nomination? Sure. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Nate. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, Scott Riley being the Vice Chair, indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous for Mr. Riley. Board training, I'll turn it over to staff.
Thanks, Pete. So typically once a year and sometimes more, we like to touch base on some of the operational things about how the DRB operates. So you are all volunteers appointed by the select board, and we are town staff hired to support the administration of the zoning bylaw. The Development Review Board is a function of the Williston Unified Development Bylaw for reviewing permit applications, for hearing appeals of decisions that a zoning administrator makes for the town of Williston. There's two key documents that I didn't bother printing because they are easily found online through the maze of our website. But if you would like a copy, we can provide them. The town's conflict of interest ordinance and the town volunteer policy. And the volunteer policy basically explains, the minimum number of meetings to attend, how to conduct yourself and prepare for meetings, kind of the boilerplate, be a good volunteer policy. And then the more nuanced one is the conflict of interest ordinance, which talks about the principles with which to conduct yourself with on a board, and it explains the recusal process, the ex parte communication process, and then any complaints that an applicant or a citizen might have with the board, how those complaints would be handled. Ex parte communication means communication that happens outside of this meeting. So the Development Review Board is holding quasi-judicial proceedings. It's like court. So the chair opens the hearing, the applicant presents testimony, and then when the hearing is closed, you weigh that testimony, both their written application and the words that were spoken at the meeting, in reviewing all testimony presented and issuing that decision. So because of the quasi-judicial proceeding, if someone comes up to you in the grocery store and says, hey, I really don't like that application, and here's why, you have an easy out of that conversation. I'm sorry, I'm on the DRB. We would love to have your comments. They need to be submitted at the hearing by a letter or an email or spoken at the hearing. So discussing the applications and their merits in person or online with another board member or another member of the community outside of the public hearing is discouraged. And sometimes life happens, and that's part of the ex parte communication. Someone came up to me in the grocery store and they were asking me about this project, and I gave them the basic information about how to find it on the website, but we didn't discuss its merits, that kind of thing. Recusals, it's, typically if you're in a butter or you're a direct, have a direct business relationship with either the property owner. In some instances, it gets a little stickier with consultants, it's a small world in Vermont, especially a small engineering and design consultant world. So some of those conversations can kind of be had on a case-by-case basis. Like, hey, my business is doing business with that engineering firm. Is it okay? Or that architect that's representing the application, worked on my kitchen a couple years ago. It's always okay to come to us as staff or the DRB chair to ask, and then we can make a case-by-case decision. A lot of how the board is governed by state law with open meeting law. So we do most of that homework for you in terms of warning public hearings, getting them noticed in the paper, getting abutter envelopes to neighbors when necessary. But as town volunteers, you do have access to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, VLCT website. If you don't have access, let me know and we can get you linked up. It has a lot of resources on there about open meeting law, about being a volunteer member for the town. And that is about the fastest board training I can do. If you guys have specific questions, we can dive into them, or if you would like to discuss something in deeper detail at an upcoming meeting, we can also do that.
So I'd like to make one comment for the new guys. This board does not make policy. Policy's already made. All we do is judge compliance. So the craziest example I could come up with is that a nuclear power plant is proposed and it's sitting next to your house. If it's in the zoning district that allows a nuclear power plant to sit next to your house, it gets approved. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. Staff does a fabulous job of lining up, of doing all the research and making sure that the data that we get shows what can and cannot be approved. And then it's up to us to read it and understand it and ask questions, and certainly in things like this. it's a little more complicated, but that's really what we do here is judge compliance. You know, we don't, you know, even if you think, you know, if you can't come to the board and say, man, I really don't like what's going on in town and I'm gonna change it. That's not what we're here for. If you want to do that, you got to get yourself, you know, either on the planning commission or the select board. So that's that in a nutshell is really what we do.
And occasionally, the DRB will be criticized for I've heard it referred to as rubber stamp approvals. And I think there's a misconception out there because staff does an excellent job at screening applications so that when they finally get to us, they're compliant. And so they're a compliant application that is consistent with rules made by others. And that's the select board and the planning commission and basically our zoning plan. And so once it hits our desk, it has already been fully vetted through the process, and it's unusual for things to go in a different direction than approval because of that vetting process.
So every applicant has the right to a hearing. So the staff can tell the applicant, you know, we really don't think this complies, but if the applicant wants to submit their request for an approval, they have every right to go do that and sit at the table, and we get a chance to look at it, and staff will tell us in the meeting saying, yes, it could go this way, yes, it could go that way. We can, you know, here are what your options are, here are what the issues are, and then it would be up to the board to determine compliance. So they don't always screen out everybody, and you know, but for the most part, if you go back and look at the voting record of this board, it is a lot of times a rubber stamp because they did their job. Not always, but a lot. So it's I hope you guys enjoy being on the board. You learn a lot about the town, see a lot of fun stuff, and it's a whole different area that you would not otherwise see unless you were doing this or maybe worked in the business that these guys are in.
So any questions on any of that? That was all. That was a bit.
Maybe some examples of when it would be okay for a board member to reach out to town staff with a question about policy or even an application or to another board member, what's okay, what's not. Examples could be helpful.
Yeah, so if we have an upcoming application, and you're working through the staff report and you have a question, we also post those application materials many weeks in advance of the hearing. So if you see it on the website and you're interested and you have a question about it, you're welcome to ask us in advance of the hearing. Typically, board members should not, talk outside of the hearing. We can talk by email to schedule hearings, to pick a date, to pick a time and location, but we can't talk, you guys can't talk by email about substantive material. So really that one-on-one communication by emailing someone from staff or emailing the chair is the most appropriate way to communicate. And it's always okay to ask a question and be like, oh, we should wait to discuss that at the hearing. That's totally fine.
So reaching out to a single staff member is fine versus replying all, asking a question could be a violation of the open meeting law because everyone's on it.
Right, yep. So if we send out the staff report and you're like, hey, I'm really confused about this landscaping section. I think it should be this type of buffer instead of this type of buffer. That type of email is very substantive and should not be discussed. But if it's a reply all, hey, turns out I'm not able to make it tonight. If you don't have a quorum, let me know how we can, find a different time. That's totally fine.
Taking Emily's example of the landscaping question, when we're in the hearing, this is the time to ask questions. If you don't understand it, ask. You're not, that's what we're here for. Nobody assumes that, you know everything about this. It took me a long time to kind of get a reasonable understanding of what the hell we do here.
Yeah.
It is not instantaneous.
That's helpful. Yeah, so if we're here, it's okay to ask staff a question after a report
Oh, God, yes.
in front
I mean,
of
that's-
the
that's what
applicant.
they're
It's
here for.
not, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
They're the experts.
Right.
So, we're the lay people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They generally have the answers when it comes to the bylaw and all of the regulations that surround what we're doing here, and they'll lay it out for us. And if you need to have it explained again and again, they'll do it, so that when we make a decision, it is reasonably well informed. And some of this stuff is darn arcane, so again, it's interesting, but it can be really, really odd.
yeah. Yeah, and never feel bad about critiquing something that's written in the staff report. Like, Emily, what this paragraph says makes absolutely no sense. Can you rephrase it? Can you explain it a different way? And I'll be like, yep, let's try to work through it. So we do our best to be as clear and concise as possible, sometimes to a fault. Always happy in the hearing to rephrase and make sure everybody's understanding on the same page.
So there's a couple other things too, is that when you read through the staff report, there's going to be conditions and conditions of approval and a number of other items that the staff are going to put together. You do not have to accept that as rote. The decision is made by the board. It is not made by the staff. The staff is writing it for our benefit. A lot of times we leave it as is, but if you read something in there and say, I'm not so sure I agree with that, or I don't like the way it's written, or maybe we want to nuance it in a different way, we have every right to do that, and we do that on a regular basis. And so you definitely want to read, you want to pay attention to the staff report. There's a lot of stuff in here that is just dead and dull.
That's true.
Sorry.
No offense.
But generally, the staff report sums everything up, and the different commissions that provide input sum everything up. And it pays to pay attention to it. You want to cover the commissions that advise us and how they are advisory as well.
Yeah, great point. So there's two committees that are advisory to the Development Review Board, the Conservation Commission and the HDAC, the Historic and Design Advisory Committee. So Conservation Commission advises on conservation areas, which is habitat, both for animals and some unique plant species communities. They also advise on wetlands and watershed buffers. David is the conservation planner, so he staffs that committee and he prepares the staff report for that board as well. So their review is focused on watersheds, wetlands, stormwater, habitat, conservation areas.
Natural resource protections.
Natural resources, yep. The design committee advises in two main ways. One is here in the village zoning district for the historic standards. And they also advise me and some of my administration of that standard, because the new village bylaw gives a lot of administrative authorization as well. They also advise in the design review district, which used to be the Taft Corners zoning district, but is not. It's now just the remnants of the design review area in the industrial district along Williston Road, Marshall Avenue, and then the Gateway District. So Gateway North up by the car wash, James Brown Drive area. Gateway South, where Hurricane Lane and the new State Park and Ride police barracks are. And Gateway West, so that to the east of the new U-Haul where the new dentist office went in the Shell station, that's the Gateway West area. So once form-based code was adopted, there was a lot less for that committee to do, because everything that happens in the growth center in Taft Corners area is an administrative activity. And they're focused on architectural design and site design for, pedestrian orientation.
keyword being advisory,
Advisory.
okay? They advise the board. The board does not have to listen to them, which really pisses them off. But, I say that tongue in cheek. You know, they're the experts. So they are, you know, it pays for us to pay attention to what they are doing, but they are advisory.
So if you have the staff report for DP 2510, for example, you'll see for condition of approval number 3, we've bolded the recommendations that came from the Williston Conservation Commission. In general, we're going to try to draw your attention to areas of the staff report that require some kind of subjective decision-making on your part. And one of those is, of course, determining whether you think that it's the right course to adopt the advisory recommendations as written or to modify them in some way.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time with those advisory committees when they're drafting their recommendations to you, making sure that they are defensible under the bylaws. You know, sometimes, and especially in years past, it's like, hey, that's a really great idea. We don't have a bylaw standard to require them to do that thing. So if you include it, it's gonna be, you know, struck down by the DRB in their hearing. So we've spent time over the years working with those committees to make sure that they are as exacting with the bylaw as this body is in making sure pre-application recommendations and then discretionary permit conditions are as by the books as possible with the bylaw.
That is one of the things that we do try to pay attention to is when we are discussing the matter at hand with the applicant, that we try very hard to stay on topic and within our purview. So it's probably inappropriate if somebody, you know, is in here for an addition on their house, you know, and you ask them about what the, you know, I can't even come up with one. But you want to stick to the project at hand, as opposed to going off on a tangent. Okay.
Somewhat related question, I think. So the town has a stormwater coordinator. At what point in the application process might a stormwater coordinator interact with an applicant, if at all?
Probably never in the application review process. So the stormwater coordinator does not participate in the development review process. They are under the umbrella of the Public Works Director. But the stormwater coordinator's role is the town's stormwater permit. And it gets quite complicated, and I'll do my best to explain, but like all these individual applicants that have to get a state stormwater permit, because they're in Williston, they're part of the Williston MS4 permit. So there's a little bit of interconnectedness, but the applicant won't like have a sit down with the stormwater coordinator and design something together. Stormwater systems are permitted through the state of Vermont. A similar parallel would be septic systems. If someone's doing a project that's on a septic system, they design it to the state standards. They have to show us that they're adequately treating wastewater or adequately treating stormwater. They need to get a separate review with the state, and there's separate state requirements on how to design a stormwater system, how to design a septic system. The woman who is sitting here in pink, that's Christine Doherty. She's the Assistant Public Works Director. So just like the Conservation Commission and the Historic Design Advisory Committee are advisory to you, the Public Works Director or designee and the Police Department are also advisory. The Fire Department provides comment as well, though they're not listed in Chapter 2, and that might be a separate conversation.
That's a separate conversation. But on certain hearings, usually in larger scale residential applications, there'll be confusion by the general public of what the DRB can actually rule on and what is state regulated. And so what we typically do on those applications where there's gonna be, we anticipate that there'll be robust public comment, is we don't shut down the public comment, but what we do is we clarify what we can influence and what we can't, so that we don't spend a lot of time talking about something that we don't have any control over.
Yeah, and sometimes if we start to get several comment letters that bring up the same question or same concern from the public, there have been circumstances where I've written a letter addressed to the DRB from me as staff, addressing some of those common things. So like if there's a lot of concerns about noise, I can say, here's what our bylaw can do and here's what our bylaw can't do in regards to these questions or concerns. Or here's how schools are factored into, town planning as a whole, and how the bylaw doesn't have jurisdiction over, number of school kids coming out of a residential subdivision, that kind of thing. So there have been a couple applications where I've provided that letter, just so the community feels heard and that they have all of the facts to answer their questions and concerns, even if this board can't make a decision to resolve their concern.
Occasionally we'll have meetings, doesn't happen a lot, but occasionally we'll have meetings where, it's torches and pitchforks, okay? The townspeople are riled up about something. And again, generally, if they're all here, rightly so, there's an outstanding concern. And it's up to the chair to manage the process. And we all try to be very respectful to the applicant who's sitting at the table, as well as anybody and everybody who shows up and or on Zoom, here or on Zoom. Everybody gets a chance to speak. We always ask, when there are a lot of people and there is a kind of a unified public opinion, we will ask people, look, you don't need to get up in front of us and repeat what your neighbor just said. If you want to have something new to tell us, that's fine. Let's go. If you want to abbreviate what you're going to say, that's fine too. But we do try to let everybody speak, give everybody a chance to air their opinion, and be respectful while that is going on.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'll add to this general discussion is, with regards to questions, that you can, of course, always reach out to staff. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask in session and in advance, for example, like clarification about the landscape buffers or or for example, like wetland classes, class 2, class 3, what's that all about? If you reach out to us in advance, we might be able to prepare some visuals or materials, something that we can screen share to help with an explanation. So always recommend reaching out in advance if you do know that you have a question that you want to pose.
Okay, anything else? This is a good conversation.
Yeah.
I have just a question about like how the process works. So with DP 2510, you clearly had a list of items that were out of compliance. But when I'm reading the staff report, that's not super obvious to me. So where did I miss that? Like,
what I do as the chair is when there's a complicated application, I am in communication with staff to talk about some of the nuances of the application, and it's from the perspective of clarification. So that list came from from that conversation.
okay.
So you could not have seen that. That was something that I did as the chair in seeking clarification on some of the nuances of the staff report.
Okay. So in this case, this was the case where you basically didn't agree with the staff report and you you asked for more clarification, right? Because this clearly says,
It was actually, I was actually in agreement with the staff report, and what we were doing was highlighting the most important things from the staff report
Okay.
to cite them to the applicant. So
Okay.
it's actually different than what you just said. It was, I mean, I was in agreement, and we were extracting to emphasize the most relevant and important points.
which is basically all the conditions, basically. So you went through like these conditions
Yeah.
need to be, we want to see how you're going to meet these conditions
Yeah.
before we approve. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's a courtesy. It's, you know, I mean, this town of Williston we live in is a really small community. And the intent is not to be, is not to be penal to applicants.
Punitive.
Punitive, that was the word I was looking for. The intent is to have a compliant project that can be approved. And so what I was doing was trying to, really trying to give the applicant an avenue in which this application could remain active by making modifications consistent with staff's recommendations and best practices, as opposed to starting all over again.
Right.
I mean, I could have not done what I did, and I can't predict how this would have worked in terms of voting, but it's very likely that it would have been voted down, and they would have had to start all over again.
I see.
And so what I was trying to do was to try to provide an avenue to keep the application active while these changes were being made, and not have to start the whole process over again. So that's really what I was doing.
Okay. And that falls pretty squarely on the chair's kind of responsibility to do some of that.
Yeah, not necessarily.
I didn't hear the one word you said.
Like, we're all expected to do something like that if we have that similar, like, so you're, as a chair, obviously you're running the meeting, so you're,
Yeah, you're not responsible to do that.
yeah, okay,
No, that's the chair's responsibility.
okay.
So we do, there is something, we have something we call executive session. It's basically when we kick everybody out, close the door, turn off the mics, and we talk about this amongst ourselves. And it's a chance to just, air it out and see what everybody thinks. Different boards are run different ways. Generally, our boards run unanimously because we talk it out ahead of, that doesn't necessarily, they always go that way. But we probably more often than not, because we spend time hammering out, between ourselves, what do people think? What do they need? How do they feel about the project? Where are their hot buttons? And we come up with a consensus. Different boards run different ways. I have seen other boards run where that does not happen. And everybody, you can have all kinds of different varying votes. And neither one is right. It's just how the chair, wants to run the board.
Right.
But we do use executive session to talk out how we do, the process and the topic, and all of the items that go into the approval process, and generally come up with a consensus.
Yeah, that's a good segue, and I can jump in on deliberation. So it's part of that quasi judicial proceeding, and when the hearing is closed, you're acting like a judge or a jury, and the VLCT guidance says, take evidence or testimony and then weigh, examine, and discuss the reasons for or against an act or decision based on that evidence. So you're taking everything that was put in the staff report and the application materials and all the public comment and the applicant's comments in the hearing, and you finalize the findings, conclusions, and conditions of approval. We draft them up for you and do the homework for you, and then in deliberations, you decide on should this condition be struck or reworded? Can it be reworded to be more clear? A lot of times where there is a decision point for the DRB, we'll write the condition, a type 2 or type 3 buffer, pick one, and we make it really, cut and paste.
Or a yes or a no.
Or yes or no, or finding a fact, the outdoor storage is or is not in the side yard setback, and you review the materials and then you pick yes, is or is not. So we try to queue up that writing, but to the earlier comment, you can always, question them, see if they should say something else, say something different, if something was missed and should be a finding or a condition. State law allows the Development Review Board to have deliberative session. The Historic Committee cannot, the Conservation Committee cannot, and the Select Board can have executive session for explicit reasons listed in state law. So these deliberative sessions are only for very narrow purposes. This DRB has always operated very efficiently compared to other communities by most of the time, the hearing is opened and closed that night. The DRB deliberates that night. The draft written decision is available literally the next day in the minutes, and then it becomes final at the following meeting when the minutes are approved, and that's when the written decision is approved. So in state law, DRBs have up to 45 days to deliberate. So we operate quite efficiently here. There have been a few rare instances where an additional meeting was needed because it's after 10 o'clock at night and our brains are fried and we want to come back to it with fresh heads or need more time to work through things. But most of the time it's in the same night.
And in a theme of the Williston DRB, I'm talking about in the context of the deliberative session, it's very collaborative. It was collaborative when Scott was chair. It's been collaborative during my time, and I fully expect that it will be with Nate. And because people's opinions and their voice matters, and it's kind of I kind of call it the Vermont way. We want to listen to each other.
Makes sense.
Anything else?
No, I would just add to your question for Pete earlier. I was looking at the list of items that were read out into the record, and the staff report recommendation. So if you look at the recommended action, in many of the staff reports, we often have a recommended action. Like we might actually recommend that you deliberate and approve if it is fairly self-evident that most of things are leading towards compliance. In this case, it was fairly self-evident that although many of the things that are listed on here could be resolved at final plans, the principal decision point was pretty critical in determining whether or not a redesign would be required. And so we elected not to place a specific recommended action, except with the caveat that compliance with this WDB 27.5 is really contingent on the TRB decision tonight. So.
Great. Okay, anything else?
No minutes? We did.
No, we already
No,
approved them by unanimous consent.
We did that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor of adjourning the meeting indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you all.
See you September 23rd, no meeting on the 9th.